The golden age of Hollywood glittered on screen. The women were icons. Their public lives were sculpted fantasies, polished like marble. But behind the velvet curtain, a different war was being fought, a quiet, ruthless war, and the weapons weren't fists or contracts, they were private diaries, hidden journals, love letters sealed with trust. These were the most dangerous objects in Hollywood. More dangerous than a bad review. More dangerous than a box office disaster. Because a woman's own handwriting, her most honest thoughts, could be turned against her with surgical precision. Studio bosses wanted obedience. Rival stars wanted elimination. Gossip columnists wanted blood. So they stole. They copied. They bribed. They betrayed. A famous woman's deepest fears became front-page entertainment. Her private heartbreak became a punchline at a dinner party. Her secret love became a public execution. And nobody faced consequences. Nobody was held accountable. Nobody was even embarrassed. Because in old Hollywood, destroying a woman with her own words wasn't a crime. It was standard operating procedure. This is the story of 10 stars whose glory was stripped away, not under bright lights, but page by stolen page. And the system that did it to them, it was never dismantled. It just changed its name. Number 1, Mary Astor, The Purple Diary. Catastrophe. Mary Astor was one of the most respected actresses of the 1930s, elegant, intelligent, and private. She kept a detailed personal diary, the way many thoughtful people do, as a place to process her life honestly. Among the entries was a candid account of her romantic relationship with the celebrated playwright George S. Kaufman. Then came the divorce. In 1936, her husband, Dr. Franklin Thorpe, seized the diary. He didn't just use it in court proceedings, he weaponized it. Her most intimate, vulnerable words were read aloud in a public courtroom. Newspapers across America scrambled to print every revealing detail. Editors fought over who could publish the most provocative excerpts. The public consumed her private life like a spectacle. Here's what makes this truly unconscionable. Mary Astor didn't do anything that her male colleagues weren't doing openly, freely, and without consequence every single day. Leading men carried on affairs that were open secrets. Studio bosses pursued young women routinely. But when a woman's private words confirmed she had desire, agency, and passion, that was treated as an unforgivable moral collapse. The studios pressured her to disappear. She refused. She fought to keep working, but the diary defined her for decades, not her talent, not her craft, her stolen words. And here's the detail that should make your blood run cold. There is credible historical debate about whether parts of the diary were altered, exaggerated, or even fabricated during the legal proceedings. Her most private document may not have even been accurately represented. The truth didn't matter. The destruction was the point. Number 2, Tallulah Bankhead, betrayed by her own circle. Tallulah Bankhead was a force of nature, witty, fearless, unapologetically herself in an era that demanded women be quiet, pretty, and compliant. She was a massive star on the stage in London and New York. Hollywood should have been her kingdom. It wasn't, and her own diary helped lock her out. Tallulah wrote candidly. She documented her social life, her opinions, her relationships. She did what writers and thinkers do. She processed the world through words, but someone in her inner circle, someone she trusted, took pages from her private writings. These pages described her legendary gatherings, her romantic life, and her unfiltered opinions about powerful people. The stolen material was funneled to gossip columnists, and the columnists didn't report facts. They constructed a narrative. Tallulah Bankhead was too much, too wild, too uncontrollable, too risky for a major motion picture. Think about what actually happened here. A woman's private thoughts, never intended for anyone else's eyes, were stolen and then used to construct a public persona that studios cited as a reason to deny her work. She wasn't denied roles because of poor performances. She was denied roles because her stolen diary made executives uncomfortable. Her Broadway career thrived because the theater world valued boldness. Hollywood punished it. And the punishment was built on theft. The broader pattern is critical to understand. The gossip columnists, primarily Louella Parsons and Hedda Hopper, were not independent journalists. They were functionally employed by the studios. They published what the studios wanted published. They destroyed who the studios wanted destroyed. The leak of Tallulah's diary pages wasn't random bad luck. It was a coordinated decision. Number 3. Hedy Lamarr. The genius they chose to diminish. Hedy Lamarr's story might be the most infuriating on this list. She was not just a stunning screen presence. She was a legitimate inventor. During the height of global conflict in the 1940s, she co-developed a frequency-hopping communication system that would eventually become foundational technology for modern wireless communication. She was, without exaggeration, one of the most brilliant minds in Hollywood. She was also deeply lonely. She had escaped a suffocating, controlling marriage in Europe and come to America seeking creative and personal freedom. She kept journals where she wrote about her ideas, her isolation, and her sadness. These were the private reflections of a complex, extraordinary woman. Rival actresses, envious of the attention Hedy received, obtained entries from these journals. The material that was leaked wasn't about her inventions or her intellect. It was about her sorrow, her vulnerability. The entries were selectively curated to make her appear emotionally fragile and difficult to manage. This was devastatingly strategic. When Hedy argued for better roles, the studio pointed to her own words as evidence that she was troubled. When she pushed for more equitable compensation, they whispered that she was unstable. Her private pain, a natural human response to isolation and displacement, was repackaged as a professional liability. They didn't just steal her diary. They stole her credibility. A woman who was inventing technology decades ahead of its time was reduced to a difficult actress because someone betrayed her private grief. The world didn't broadly recognize her scientific contributions until long after her passing. The stolen diary entries helped ensure that. Number 4, Joan Crawford, manufactured feuds and controlled narratives. Joan Crawford didn't inherit anything. She climbed to stardom through relentless, ferocious determination. At MGM in the late 1920s and early 1930s, she was a rising powerhouse, but she had a problem. The studio's golden favorite was Norma Shearer, who happened to be married to Irving Thalberg, the head of production. The favoritism was blatant and constant. Shearer received the prestige projects. Crawford received whatever was left. Crawford wrote about this in her diaries. Honestly, passionately, she expressed her frustration at a system that rewarded marriage to a powerful man over actual talent. She was right, and she was punished for being right. Someone in her circle accessed those diaries. The most inflammatory passages carefully selected and stripped of context, were fed to press contacts. The story that emerged wasn't about systemic unfairness at MGM. It was about Joan Crawford being bitter, jealous, and ungrateful. This is where the genius of the system reveals itself. The studio didn't just hurt Crawford with the leak. It weaponized both women simultaneously. Now Crawford and Shearer were locked in a feud manufactured by the studio itself. Both women were afraid. Both women knew that more diary material could surface at any time. Both women became more compliant, more controllable, more desperate to stay in the studio's good graces. The studio created the conflict, profited from the drama, and used the fear to maintain dominance over two of its biggest stars. Crawford's diary didn't just betray her. It was turned into a mechanism of control over multiple people. Number 5. Frances Farmer. Diary as a weapon of destruction. Frances Farmer's story is not just tragic. It is one of the most disturbing accounts of institutional cruelty in American entertainment history. She was talented, fiercely intelligent, and openly critical of the Hollywood studio system. She saw it for what it was: exploitative, dishonest, and hostile to genuine artistry. She wrote these feelings in her diaries with unflinching honesty. In the late 1930s, studio enforcers, the shadowy operatives who handled problems for executives, confiscated her personal writings. They didn't confiscate them for safekeeping. They confiscated them for ammunition. The most angry, most rebellious passages were selectively leaked. The public was presented with a portrait of a woman who was ungrateful, hostile, and dangerously radical. But here's where it crosses from cruelty into something much darker. The narrative constructed from her stolen diary entries that Frances Farmer was unstable and uncontrollable was later used to justify her forced confinement in a psychiatric facility. Her own private thoughts, stolen from her, were cited as evidence that she couldn't function in society. What followed were years of institutionalization under conditions that multiple historical accounts describe as horrific. Her autonomy was obliterated. Her career was annihilated. Her spirit was systematically broken. Frances Farmer didn't lose her career because she lacked talent. She lost everything because she was honest in a private document, and powerful people stole that honesty and used it to declare her unfit for freedom itself. Of all 10 cases, this one should haunt us the most, because the leap from stolen diary to locked away in a facility reveals what the system was truly capable of when a woman refused to be silent. Number 6. Mae West, punishing a woman who refused to be tamed. Mae West terrified powerful men, not because she was aggressive, because she was unbothered. She wrote her own material. She controlled her own image. She made fortunes for studios, while openly mocking the moral codes those studios pretended to uphold. She was the most dangerous kind of woman in 1930s Hollywood, one who didn't need permission. She also kept private memos and notes about the executives she dealt with. Her observations were sharp, blunt, and devastatingly accurate. These were never meant for public consumption. They were the private assessments of a brilliant woman navigating a system run by men who resented her independence. In the mid-1930s, during escalating battles with studio censors who were determined to sanitize her work, pages from these private memos surfaced. The contents included her unvarnished opinions about specific executives and the absurdity of the censorship apparatus. The leaks were timed perfectly. They coincided with the Hays Code enforcement that was already trying to diminish her influence. The leaked memos were used to reinforce the narrative that Mae West was vulgar, unmanageable, and a threat to public decency. The goal was never to inform the public. The goal was to strip her of leverage. If Mae West was seen as obscene rather than brilliant, her negotiating power evaporated. If she was framed as a problem rather than a profit engine, the studio could dictate terms. It partially worked. Her creative freedom was curtailed. The boldest voice in Hollywood was muffled, not by audience rejection, but by a system that stole her private thoughts and used them to justify suppression. Number 7. Lupe Velez. Stolen pain, weaponized stereotypes. Lupe Velez was electric. She lit up every screen and every room she entered. She was also one of the very few Latina stars in Golden Age Hollywood, which meant the industry simultaneously profited from her and diminished her. She was marketed as the Mexican Spitfire, a nickname that reduced her enormous talent to a crude ethnic caricature. Behind the public persona, Lupe experienced profound heartbreak. Her relationship with Gary Cooper was passionate and ultimately devastating. She processed that grief the way many people do. She wrote about it. Her diaries contained raw, unguarded entries about love, loss, and emotional devastation. After a painful separation, a rival in the industry obtained copies of these heartbroken entries. The material was delivered to gossip columnists, including the notoriously ruthless Louella Parsons. The resulting coverage didn't portray Lupe as a woman experiencing ordinary human heartbreak. It portrayed her as hysterical, irrational, and out of control. This is where the intersection of stolen privacy and systemic prejudice becomes undeniable. A white actress writing about heartbreak might have been portrayed as romantic or sympathetic. Lupe Velez, writing about heartbreak, was portrayed as excessive and unhinged because the existing stereotype of the fiery Latina was already in place, waiting to be confirmed. Her stolen diary entries didn't just damage her career. They cemented a prejudiced caricature that she spent her entire professional life trying to escape. The industry took her most human moments, her grief and vulnerability, and used them to reinforce the very box she was fighting to break out of. Lupe Velez deserved to be remembered for her talent, her charisma, and her groundbreaking presence. Instead, stolen diary pages helped ensure she was remembered as a punchline. The cruelty of that is almost incomprehensible. Number 8. Jean Harlow. Exploiting grief for profit. Jean Harlow's life contained an enormous amount of pain beneath the glamorous surface. When her husband, Paul Byrne, passed away under mysterious and deeply tragic circumstances in 1932, the media frenzy was immediate and merciless. Harlow was barely in her 20s. She was grieving, confused, and profoundly vulnerable. During this period, she wrote. She wrote about her confusion, her sorrow, and her attempts to make sense of an incomprehensible loss. These writings were deeply private, the kind of documents a person creates when they have nowhere else to turn. Someone in her orbit, motivated by financial gain, access, or both, took these private writings. The most sensational passages were sold to scandal-focused publications. Her grief became content. Her confusion became a headline. Her worst moments were consumed by a public that treated human suffering as entertainment. What makes Jean Harlow's case particularly devastating is the timing. She was already under extraordinary scrutiny because of the circumstances surrounding her husband's passing. The stolen diary entries added fuel to speculation, rumor, and innuendo that followed her for the rest of her tragically short life. She wasn't given space to grieve. She wasn't given privacy to heal. Her own words, written in her darkest hours, were taken from her and sold to the highest bidder. The people who did this faced no consequences. The publications that printed stolen material faced no accountability. The system protected everyone except the woman whose pain was being monetized. Number 9. Carole Lombard. Trust shattered for competitive advantage. Carole Lombard was one of old Hollywood's most genuinely beloved figures. Audiences adored her. Colleagues respected her. She was known for being authentic in an industry built entirely on artifice. In the early 1930s, she was in a relationship with Clark Gable. The problem was that Gable was still married. In that era, this wasn't just a personal complication. It was a potential career-ending scandal for both parties. Lombard understood the stakes, and she documented her feelings privately in a diary. A rival at the studio, someone directly threatened by Lombard's rising status, orchestrated the theft of diary pages detailing the relationship. The material was leaked strategically, designed to cause maximum damage. Consider the calculation involved. This wasn't an impulsive act. Someone identified Lombard as a threat. Someone determined that her diary contained exploitable material. Someone arranged for the physical theft of private documents. Someone selected the most damaging passages, and someone ensured those passages reached the press. This was a planned operation to destroy a colleague. The resulting scandal forced both Lombard and Gable into crisis management. The studio had to intervene, spending resources and political capital to contain the damage. Lombard's trust in her colleagues, in her privacy, in the basic safety of her own home was shattered. She continued to be a major star. She continued to be loved. But the theft of her diary revealed a truth she could never unlearn. In Hollywood, the people closest to you were often the most dangerous. Number 10. Judy Garland. A Stolen Childhood. Weaponized Forever. Judy Garland's case is the one that exposes the full systematic horror of what this industry did to women. Because they didn't just steal her diary as an adult. They used her childhood writings against her for decades. From the time she was a young girl, Judy was property of MGM. The studio controlled her schedule, her diet, her medication, and her public image. She was given stimulants to keep her energy up for filming and then given sedatives to help her rest afterward. She was told she wasn't thin enough. She was worked relentlessly. She was a child, and she was being systematically exploited by the very adults entrusted with her care. She wrote diaries. Of course she did. She was a lonely, overwhelmed young person trying to make sense of an adult world that was consuming her. She wrote about her fears. She wrote about the hunger from studio-enforced dietary restrictions. She wrote about her exhaustion. These were the private words of a child in distress. Years later, when adult Judy Garland fought for better contract terms, when she pushed back against exploitation, when she dared to assert her own worth, studio lawyers made it known that they possessed records from her youth. They implied, and sometimes stated directly, that her childhood diary entries could be released to the public as evidence that she had always been difficult, that she had always been unstable. Let that register. They took the private writings of a suffering child and held them over a grown woman's head as blackmail material. The writings that should have been evidence of the studio's cruelty toward a minor were instead twisted into a weapon against the very person they had harmed. This wasn't just diary theft. This was the use of a child's documented pain as a tool of lifelong coercion, and the people who did it were celebrated executives, respected lawyers, and pillars of the entertainment industry. Judy Garland's stolen childhood diaries represent the darkest possible expression of this entire system. The powerful exploited a child, the child wrote about it, and then the powerful stole those writings and used them to continue the exploitation into adulthood. Their words were beautiful. Their words were devastated. Their words were furious. And every single one of those words belonged to them, only to them. Hollywood sold their faces to the world. Then it broke into their desks and sold their souls. The studio system was never about creating art. It was about creating compliance. And the most effective compliance tool ever devised was the threat of exposure. Write honestly in your diary, and someone will steal it. Feel something real, and someone will use it against you. Be human in private, and your humanity becomes public property. These 10 women weren't destroyed by scandal. They were destroyed by theft. Physical, deliberate, calculated theft of their most private possessions. And the thieves, the studio executives, the rival stars, the corrupt columnists, the bribed servants, none of them were ever held accountable. Not one. The studios eventually burned many of the diaries and documents, not out of shame. Out of self-preservation, they destroyed the evidence of their own operations. They wanted this history erased. They wanted us to remember the Golden Age as a time of glamour and magic, not as a time when powerful institutions systematically violated the privacy of women to maintain control. We are not going to let them erase it. Mary Astor, Tallulah Bankhead, Hedy Lamarr, Joan Crawford, Frances Farmer, Mae West, Lupe Velez, Jean Harlow, Carole Lombard, Judy Garland. They trusted their own diaries with the truth, and the most powerful industry on earth punished them for it. Remember their names. Remember what was done to them. And the next time someone tells you the golden age of Hollywood was a beautiful dream, remind them of the stolen pages that prove it was something else entirely.